Did you know that She-Hulk was the last classic character that Stan Lee created during his golden run at Marvel? Starting in 1961, Lee co-created the Fantastic Four and then Spider-Man, Thor, X-Men, the Hulk, Iron Man, and many more characters throughout the 70s, and in 1979 he created She-Hulk as a sneaky way to get on TV. Now, this was right before leaving comics to work on bringing Marvel projects to the big and small screen. In the case of She-Hulk, Lee wouldn't live to see his creation in live action, but the rest of the world would. They just had to wait another 43 years. In this episode of Graphic Adaptations, I want to look at a specific run of the comic book that I think is the obvious choice of inspiration for, and compare it to, the Disney Plus series, She-Hulk. So Stan Lee's trying to get more Marvel IP on TV and in movies. The reason he created She-Hulk was because the Bill Bixby Incredible Hulk show was in production and competing with the Bionic Woman at the time. The thought was to give Hulk a female counterpart, and so Lee created the first issue of She-Hulk as a backdoor way of getting her on TV and controlling the rights to the character by publishing her in the comics first. That way Marvel still owned the rights. It's really clever thinking, actually. It didn't work the way that he hoped, though. The network canceled the Hulk show in its 6th season, only a half dozen episodes in, and the She-Hulk episode didn't even get filmed. Now, Stan does manage to get some Marvel stuff on TV, but it's mostly in animation, and She-Hulk does make appearances throughout the 80s and 90s, but to get to a live-action series, we'd have to wait until 2022. And in that time, She-Hulk had a few different comic series. The longest running series is about 60 issues, written by John Byrne, called The Sensational She-Hulk. This is probably the best known run on She-Hulk, but not the one that I want to talk about specifically, though the influence of the Byrne run is definitely felt on the show, and we'll get into it. But first, let's look at the show and see what they picked up from the classic run. She-Hulk, Attorney at Law, is the 8th Marvel Disney TV series, and it has 8 episodes. We get the origin story in the first episode, along with a guest appearance of Ruffalo Hulk to ease us into this new show with something familiar and likable. She also turns big and green, but unlike Bruce, her Hulk self isn't uncontrollable. And shortly afterwards, she's fired from her job as a liability to the law firm for hulking out to save some people, and then the majority of the show is about her new job at a law firm that handles superhero lawsuits. We also see her struggle with her dating life. She-Hulk, aka Jennifer Walters, is played by Tatiana Maslany, who's Canadian. They didn't get that from the comics, I just like pointing it out when I can. So the show does break the fourth wall like the John Byrne comic did. This is years before Deadpool or Ferris Bueller did it. There wasn't as much of her being a lawyer in the comic either, as much as superheroing around with the Avengers. Then there's the sex appeal factor. I know people roll their eyes at the twerking scene in the show with Megan Thee Stallion, but it's weird for such an odd scene to be so debated. Like, first, let's acknowledge that the Byrne run was notorious for challenging censors, very specifically for being exploitative of She-Hulk's body. The cover of issue 40 shows She-Hulk trying to cover herself with the Comics Code Authority. Then there was the Vanity Fair cover mocking Demi Moore being nude on their cover. There was the time that she was shown jumping rope naked and used the motion lines of the rope to blur out anything too risque. And then there's also this twisted scene in issue 18 where she's made to strip in front of a gang of security agents that all leer at her until Dum Dum Dugan comes in and demands to know what's going on, and her shirt's torn, where we get a wardrobe malfunction. So this is all canon and not in contention by the people upset about the twerking scene. The twerking is a silly scene in a part comedy and part parody series. I think the difference really is that She-Hulk is enjoying herself dancing with Megan Thee Stallion. She's not being taken advantage of. So she's always been a sex symbol, but now that it's on her own terms, it's a problem for some reason, right? It's ridiculous. Now, if you have a problem with the sexual exploitation of the character, then you should not like the comic either. It's just a hypocritical stance. Now, the one criticism that I've heard that I think is fair game, that I agree with, is that She-Hulk looks weird and the CGI is a little off-putting. I think that's fair. I'm sure it was expensive AF for the whole season of She-Hulk being generated by computers. And so my only twist to maybe lighten that criticism is that it looks to me like the covers of the Dan Slott series by Adi Granoff. I mean, look at these cool and iconic covers. A more airbrushed or painted look as opposed to line drawing in ink and pencil. It's almost 3D looking, like an AI image of real She-Hulk. I mean, I love those covers, and that's kind of what it looks like we got in the live action series, so I kind of give it a pass. Adi Granoff is a superb artist who is maybe best known for his work on the Iron Man Extremis series, and also his work on the first Iron Man movie, which is an undoubted classic and an archetype of the genre. And in my estimation, his work on She-Hulk contributed to the best run of the character's history. So let's talk about the Dan Slott run. It doesn't break the fourth wall like the show or the John Byrne run, but it does have a lot of familiar stuff borrowed for the show. Her dating and coping with the dual identities of She-Hulk and Jen Walters is also a prevalent theme in the comic. She gets fired for being a liability at work and then hired at an odd law firm. She's dating and looking for the right guy. This is all stuff from the Dan Slott run. It's got a Boston legal Aaron Sorkin vibe to it, the show does, because of the comic. The character of Mallory Book is from the comic, as is the idea of representing superheroes in court for issues like defamation and liability for damages. It's all brought off the page for the show from Slott's run. This is another reason why I dismiss the criticism of having so many guest stars in the show. We see Wong appear, as well as the Abomination and Daredevil, which aren't specific guest stars from the comic, but the tone and scenes match the book pretty well, and I think the intention is pretty clear. Of course, there are other parts that got left out, my favorite being the long boxes. Using the long boxes as legally admissible in court is genius. The idea that within the universe of Marvel, the superheroes license their stories, which makes the Marvel comics that we read actually based around the idea that the Comics Code Authority is a federal seal, which is both cute and clever and legally binding. It's so great. It's just too bad that this couldn't be incorporated into the TV series, but it would make no sense for her character to have comics based on her during an origin story. But it could have been really cool if there had been a story maybe featuring like Bucky trying to defend his image from a lawsuit, and then Jen uses old Captain America comics from 1940s as evidence. I don't know, maybe that doesn't entirely work, but you get what I'm going for. And some ideas are maybe just best left for the comics. Now, the second volume takes She-Hulk into space and other dimensions to deal with interdimensional law, and it doesn't look like we're going to get a season 2 of the show, but if we had, I think it would have been really cool to see her dealing with the legal ramifications of the multiverse stuff that Marvel Cinematic has been playing with in Loki and Doctor Strange too. Now, the last episode of She-Hulk really dives into the breaking of the fourth wall with an almost Duck-a-Muck level of surrealism. Duck-a-Muck is an old Daffy Duck cartoon where an unseen artist is repainting Daffy into new clothes and situations against his will. I won't go into the details here in case anybody hasn't seen it, but it's definitely something different from all of the other Marvel entries. And I wish the show would get another season, because it was fun. The comic, the Dan Slott run, is cute and really cool with fun plots utilizing the lawyer angle like the show does. It's a relatively short run in the books, but on my shelf, in my personal library, like in this room, this is the definitive She-Hulk. So if you like the show, you might like to check out this run of comics. I wish Stan had lived long enough to see his first attempt at bringing She-Hulk into live action, but here we are 43 years later and we got it. And if you didn't like the show, I'm sure there are many valid complaints. Feel free to leave them in the comments below. I may or may not read those ones. I'll see you next week.